last softball, and then we'll open up for some questions. Thanks for bearing with us. What's the role to the panel? What's the role of messaging, storytelling, and packaging? An entrepreneur has to tell one story to win customers, and maybe to tell a different story to other stakeholders, particularly as the organization grows. So I wonder, Leslie, since you're ready to go, if you have a perspective on that.
Yeah, well, actually, it kind of links to the end of the last discussion. A lot of the discussion around how do you measure and demonstrate the social impact and tell that story. I would say that, you know, two quick answers. One is, in addition to changing how we measure, we need to change the unit of measure. Because right now, we continue to measure the impact of individual organizations, whether it's individual companies or nonprofits. And yet we know how social change happens, how people get out of poverty, how you reform a school system is always the result of collective impact, another concept that we write about at FSG. And to illustrate this, you know, let me just ask you a rhetorical question. Which snowflake breaks the branch? Any answers?
The last one.
It's the last one. Is it?
No, it's all of them.
It's, of course it's all of them. Just like that silly slide of the guy, the movement dancer, you know.
He said it was rhetorical.
Right, like you don't get the change, you don't get the Civil Rights Movement and the Voting Rights Act without the collective weight of millions of people sitting in and giving money and making the change happen. It's not just because of the NAACP or King or whatever. And so in the social innovation world, we all know that's how you get social impact, and you can't attribute it to just a single organization most of the time. Any more than you can attribute many of the problems we have in the world to a single company or a single government. Well, if it's an autocracy or a dictatorship, or, you know, we'll leave North Korea aside. So the unit of measurement has got to go beyond individual organizations because we're stuck in this, what we call at FSG, the paradigm of isolated impact.
And yet, if I could just challenge you for a second, and yet this morning's breakout session on workforce development and social enterprises, one of the recurring themes that we heard from the panelists were that some basic business metrics were extremely helpful in tuning up their actual delivery of social good. And so you're talking on the macro level. I just want to push back a little bit and say, not push back, just reframe and say on the micro level, until social enterprises know what their costs are, know who they're serving, know why they're different, know how they're differentiated over time sustainably, there's going to be a problem getting critical mass. And I think that we're not saying...
No, you're right. This is definitely 2.0, and we have not figured out even the 1.0. It's very hard to measure what we call outcomes. You know, to your point, right now we can measure outputs, butts and seats, how many kids graduated. That does not tell you how many kids got to college and succeeded in life, right? So until we can, first of all, get better at measuring outcomes, but then also acknowledge that it's part of this larger true ecosystem. And again, that's where the donors, the investors in the room need to be focused, because if the money goes there, then the change is going to go there. Right now, we're stuck in isolation.
Thanks. I'm going to do you, Dan, and I'm going to open it up. Sorry, Tom.
Sure.
So actually, the timing for this is amazing. So I was walking outside of our office yesterday, and I read this inside my bus stop. It was an ad for a storytelling workshop. Quote, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the things we need most in the world. I think that says a lot. I think that the way that we connect with each other, the way that we connect from an entrepreneur to an investor, from a business to a consumer, how an important consumer, person in general, it's all about stories. It's all about what connects, what pulls them in. I think it ties into the metrics, and you can't just throw numbers out there. You can't speak from any single point and be monotonously focused on that, because it's not how people work. We're all multifaceted. We're all Renaissance men and women in our own way. And that's where it resonates with anyone. And I don't think you can put anyone in an individual box. Really, the stories you tell and the way you craft a story when you talk to any particular person, you're selecting different pieces of a narrative to highlight. That's been something for us a lot. You know, we don't talk to an impact investor, of which we have many, ad nauseum distributors were in our turns next store. And if I start talking about the trees planted and the number of farmers we work with for too long with a beverage investor, their eyes goes over. But I'm not hiding one story or not telling one thing to another. It's just about what resonates with people and how we connect. And I think I'd say sort of the overall point that ties those together. One of the first things I'm sure anyone else in here can talk about is that what matters most in a deal, in a business, is people. It's all about people driving it. And so we're connecting across stories and really trusting in people. The words that come out of someone's mouth, those stories they tell, are what mean the most in terms of validating their ideas and their impact and the change they're trying to create. And so ultimately I'd say that stories are essential to the success of any social enterprise or organization, period, in the story.
Thanks. Okay, so 3 burning questions. Anyone have a question? You, in the corner there.
Busy trying to craft this question, which is a big one. I'd like to invite an elephant in the room. And I know it's outside this conference, but I will anyway, and I'll try to reframe. The elephant in the room is as I see it, just my perspective, is the globalized fractional reserve banking system and a highly speculative, manipulated casino economy. So that sets inherent restrictions on capital that can be available for doing good. Okay. So supply of capital, money, how capital and money is created. So banks can make record profits, Wall Street record highs, yet each year millions more needing food. So those are the inherent limits on how well and we can do and how much good we can do. So to positively reframe, how about a systems change idea or ideas? And 2 I just want to put on the table for comment. One is local banking ecosystem. How can we create local banking ecosystems at a level with state-owned banks, that sort of thing. And 2, crowdfunding. The power of crowdfunding to shift money out of Wall Street into Main Street and so popularizing, democratizing investment.
Wow, okay, I have the answer, but I'm not going to give it to you. So I think the first part, if I can try to take a stab at summarizing, in this perverted, distorted economy where big guys have the money and little guys don't, is there a systems changing idea, either at the local level, changing the local banking and money flow, or at the macro level? I'm going to turn that to my esteemed panelists. Any perspective on that? Leslie, take a crack.
I'm going to defer on the first part of your question. The crowdfunding democratization of capital, I think, is interesting. And there is a fascinating story in case in Do More Than Give that I'll just share briefly because it shows some of the possibility. It's the story of a foundation, the Jacobs Foundation, and they created something called Market Creek Plaza. They took a brownfield with an abandoned aerospace factory in it in southeast San Diego, took a neighborhood and said, we really want to make a difference. They didn't make a grant. They bought the property, invested a couple million, leveraged about 20 million more from others, and created a commercially viable economic enterprise zone. Locally owned businesses. They also had a Starbucks and a big food store to anchor it. This foundation is a spend-down foundation. They said, we want to transfer the ownership of this thing over to the community. So that they not only kind of spiritually own it and are invested in it, but physically own it. So for 6 years, they advocated and eventually passed legislation in the state of California to do the first community development IPO. So they IPO'd this thing. Stock price was set at $200. Wanted to sell it to local residents, all very low income, multicultural, 32 languages spoken there. There was a $10 a month layaway plan you could participate in until you could buy your stock. Now 1/3 of this thing is owned by local residents in the South San Diego community, 1/3 by the foundation, 1/3 by the community trust. Eventually they want to transfer more ownership over. So it's possible. You have to have the legislative environment and the will to go out and make it available at much smaller, just like Dan is selling small yogurts and, overseas, and you got to make it at a price point that you can have full economic participation by every income level person. And you got to let go of your ego and let go of your own ownership to enable others. So that's part of it.
Yeah, thanks. I'm gonna, not to be flip about the question, but just throw out another idea. I know that there are some panels tomorrow on social impact bonds and SIPs, and I think to sort of echo a little bit what Leslie's touching on, there's an advocacy, there's a policy shift that has to happen to create an enabling environment for some of these innovations, and perhaps to subvert the distortions in the